Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville, a Roundabout edition. It's our weekly episode where our panel helps us think through the biggest headlines in Middle Tennessee with a range of political perspectives. We'll start the hour on the 7th Congressional District race to replace Mark Green, who retired, and we'll continue following the fallout from the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which schools have become ground zero for clashes over honoring his activism. The federal government also shut down this week. How's that affecting your life? Did you vote early in the 7th District race? You're among the very few. And what do you make of how schools are handling Charlie Kirk's assassination? We welcome your calls to join us live on air. The phone number is 615-760-2000. We are also streaming video from the studio at youtube.com/@WPLN today. You can easily there on YouTube with the video stream, just drop a line in the chat, and we'll try to work that into the conversation as Josh Deepin's managing the video stream. All right, our Roundabout panel for the hour includes Republican advisor Mark Rogers, our first repeat Roundabout guest. Thank you for coming back. And Chaplain Dahron Johnson, co-chair of the Nashville Committee of the Tennessee Equality Project, and Meribah Knight, senior reporter and special projects producer here in the building at WPLN. Welcome to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, let's start with the 7th Congressional District race. This is the special election to replace Republican Mark Green, who stepped down from the district that encompasses part of Davidson County and other areas in Middle and West Tennessee. Early voting actually ends today. The special election's next week, October 7th. Turnout has been very low, so if you've already voted, good for you. Mark Rogers, just in the last couple of days, we saw a few endorsements. Governor Bill Lee, who often stays kind of quiet in primaries, but he said he likes Matt Van Epps, a veteran who worked in his administration. I wonder, this little flurry of last-minute endorsements, what does it tell you about the race?
It may give you some insight into who people in authority think is going to win. But in my experience and the experience of most of the political people I've ever worked with, endorsements have less and less impact these days for a variety of reasons as to what motivates voters.
Any particular reason that they would be losing impact?
I think part of it is that our politics on both sides is so partisan and people exist in bubbles of only limited information.
Yeah.
They only read certain things. They only listen to certain things. They only hear from people they trust.
Yeah.
That if that person that makes the endorsement isn't in your bubble, then you're not only not going to pay attention to them, but in some instances, you may actually oppose the person, and that may have more impact than the endorsement. In other words, it could alienate more people than it wins.
You might have a candidate who says, an endorsement, why don't you wait on that and let's see how we fare otherwise. Meribah, we learned this week that there's been more dark money, as it's often called, spent in this race than the candidates have spent from their own fundraising. And of that money, most of it's been spent against a single candidate by an out-of-state group that supports private school vouchers, which State Representative Jody Barrett voted against in the state legislature, kind of came out against Governor Bill Lee. What do you see there? Is this just retribution by these out-of-state PACs?
Yeah, that's the word that does come to mind. I mean, it was really interesting that they were flooding money against Barrett, who seems not to have like a huge chance, right, at winning this. So it was clearly kind of like this single issue that they were just gonna like go to town on, that they felt that they could attack him on, which was the school vouchers. But I mean, it just speaks to kind of the, how ratcheted up we are in this country about, just these partisan issues, these single issues. And then if you go against the grain, they are coming for you. I mean, we've seen this with abortion. We've seen this with vouchers. Like, it doesn't surprise me, but it surprised me in the way that I thought, well, is this going to get them what they want, or is it just going to be retribution?
Yeah, or show others that because school vouchers are such a state by state issue. But I guess it does tell others in other states that if you cross them, here's what could happen. Dahron Johnson, it's been relatively quiet on the Democratic side. Quite a bit less money raised, which I guess is not totally surprising with a smaller field. But what does that tell you about prospects for flipping this district into, to having a Democrat instead of a Republican?
Well, I know I have more expert and august voices on either side of me here. I will say something fairly fundamental, I think, to campaigns is that when you have an off-cycle election, and then when you have a special election that's off cycle, right, so the dates aren't familiar, not the candidates even aren't necessarily familiar as candidates for that particular role, you do have the opportunity for do have the greatest opportunity for change, right? And that's not to say one way or another on the candidate, but that's why I think we see so many folks on the Republican side throwing their hat into the ring, why we see a pretty decent number, four solid candidates at least. I think we would all agree on the Democratic side, and a couple of others maybe in the periphery there as well. If I could go back just a moment to something that Mark said, if that's okay, sure, to say it's kind of interesting, right, where we live in these, as you said, hyper-partisan times. But the thing that really seems that I feel like we keep on seeing is that if a candidate is able to make that direct connection, is able to have a conversation with somebody, regardless of affiliation, that willingness and that intentionality about putting oneself in a space to have those conversations across the line does show the possibility for more bleed over, maybe a little too grim of a word, but well, at least for my hopeful self, right? I was introduced as the chaplain. I have to stay in the mindset, but that there may be more points of connection, right? Than those hyper partisan politics might initially make us feel like is even possible. But once you actually start doing this, once you start having more one-on-one conversations, I think either side are seeing that there's actually more room for connection on a variety of issues there, which then makes an election, a special election like this, even more interesting about what the possibilities are. Mark?
Well, I was going to say, and in particular, that's a very good point. And by the way, that's one of the reasons that a lot of the people who are leaders don't want that kind of interaction is exactly that. But I was going to say that in particular, you have a low turnout special election, as you wisely said, that's completely off kilter, and you've got probably, and Baron, I will say I have a favorite in that race, but I'll just say there are probably 5 or 6 candidates that are going to get a decent number of votes, like over 5 or 6%. You don't know what that's going to mean. Mm-hmm. Tennessee once elected a governor, a man named Ray Blanton, a congressman from West Tennessee, who in 1974 got 18% of the Democratic primary vote. 18%.
Was that a special election?
No, that was a standard governor's race.
I see.
But it 18%.
I see.
There were like 7 really serious candidates. And the result is you got the guy who turned out to be the most corrupt governor in Tennessee history.
Well, there is a famous story about Lamar Alexander having to take over early, right? Well, we'll pray for something that is less grim than that. Let's, if you'd like to hop in on the conversation, we can certainly come back to the 7th Congressional District at any point, and that number is 615-760-2000. You can also chime in on the YouTube stream at youtube.com/@WPLN. Let's take our first call. Renee in Gallatin, you've been waiting patiently to talk on our next topic, which is going to be the fallout from the assassination of Charlie Kirk. But go ahead. You're in Sumner County, right?
Yes, I am. I'm out in Gallatin.
What have you seen at your school?
I have two daughters. One goes to Gallatin High School and one goes to Schaefer Middle School. While we're not really hearing anything in the schools themselves, our school board has definitely been using this as a ploy to quote unquote root out the quote unquote true Republicans. An hour before our last school board meeting or an hour before the last meeting, they decided to put a vote on having a national Charlie Kirk Day of Mourning.
Right.
And so they voted this through, and we had our representatives come out and say, I was afraid that if I voted no, I would lose all my funding or they would attack my family. And so now on October 14th, we have a day for Charlie Kirk, and I'm having to keep my kids home because we're not, in that political party. We're not really associated with any political party, but I don't want my kids to be used as political pawns for this anti-left and, MAGA right and all that stuff.
You're saying it's not that you have strong feelings over on the left, but there's something about it that doesn't sit well with you. What is it?
Well, I don't really consider myself a Democrat or a Republican. I feel like I'm right in the middle. I'm very conservative financially, but I'm very liberal, I guess, on social rights. And so I kind of float partyless a lot of times. And I feel like our kids and our kids' environment being, they have to go to school. And I just don't think it's fair that they're going to use our kids as pawns to see how many show up or to say, look at all these families on the left that are trying to, create divisiveness when we're just creating a day for political discourse. And my feelings is if it was political discourse, then we wouldn't have given it such an incendiary name. It would just be, the day for national political discourse.
Right.
But I also just don't think it has a place in schools.
Renee,
my youngest is 10.
Yes. Well, Renee, we're going to pick that up and talk about it. If you'd like to join Renee on the air, the number to call is 615-760-2000. Schools continue to find themselves in difficult positions, taking fire kind of from all sides over how they're handling this assassination of Charlie Kirk. I mean, a few examples. Austin Peay State University had ended up walking back the firing of a professor over comments on social media. At Sumner County schools, like Renee was talking about, the school board decided to name October 14th a day to honor Charlie Kirk. County commissioners in Sumner also trying to rename a street on a high school campus after Kirk, even though the principal objected to it. And then you've also had this private school in Nashville, Lipscomb Academy, where big influential figures are weighing in over what appeared to be kind of a dress code enforcement thing with students trying to honor Kirk by wearing red ties. School ended up apologizing after a group of parents complained, and the next day Lipscomb announced that the head of the upper school was being moved to a new role. So you had other parents standing up for him, protesting outside the school and insisting that he be reinstated. Okay, that's a lot of words there, Darren. But why is it that schools are the ones having to grapple with this assassination?
Well, thank you first for handing it over this way. I don't know that I have the best answer on this, but I will say that on a variety of issues, we've seen how folks move first on school issues, right? So because the communities, because the populations are more directly have policies we can more directly enforce around them, because they are under the age of majority, because adults feel like they have some ability to say something about those spaces, right? And then you have the types of things that our caller, for example, Renee, was talking about. Do I want my child to be in the thick of this political discussion? I thought that actually what she was suggesting about sort of what would happen if instead of highlighting a particular individual, if schools had a day of conversation around the impacts of political violence, for example, which would then encompass this most recent act of political violence, but also then allow conversation about how this is not unique, sadly, or the first, and that other moments have struck deeply in sort of the American psyche as well, and to contextualize some of that. I actually think Renee was a little bit onto something there.
Meribah.
Yeah, it just, I've been thinking a lot about rhetoric, and I think anybody who is deeply interested in politics and history is thinking about the rhetoric right now. And it feels like you're just in this tornado of it. It's coming at you from every single angle, whether it's right out of the president's mouth, whether it's from a school board, and you're just kind of, you feel like, I mean, at least when I read the news, sometimes I do, and just even walk out into a public space, you just feel like kind of the walls are closing in on you with the rhetoric. And when it comes to kind of introducing a day of remembrance for Charlie Kirk, it does strike a chord with me that I could add it to the pile of rhetoric. It's just another thing that we're going to talk about and signal that is going to be a dog whistle of sorts. It's going to make some people feel very accommodated and other people feel very unaccommodated. And so I think overall, I don't know why it gets put to schools. I think schools are sadly kind of the center of a lot of our dysfunction as adults. We decide that we're going to battle it out in the schools.
Ding, ding, ding.
But it does feel like it is just yet another kind of nick or cut or death by 1,000 cuts with the rhetoric. Like it's just flying at us from every direction.
Let's work in one more call before our break. Ricky in Franklin, you're on This Is Nashville.
Yes, sir. I'd just like to have a comment about the whole Remembrance Day for CK.
Yes.
I just think that for me, it's ridiculous for us to celebrate a man who has trying to divide our country and to put this person at a pedestal, basically. I think that, schools should not be political. Schools should be about teaching children facts, not about opinions. And honestly, I think that this thing is all about opinion. And unfortunately, we're in the state of Tennessee where the Republicans own everything. And to me, it's just gotten to be a little bit ridiculous. I think we need to look at the actual facts. Let's not celebrate somebody who does this, divides people. Why don't we celebrate people that actually bring people together? Because in all honesty, when you look at it, we're all Americans, regardless of our political party.
Ricky, appreciate the call, and we'll chew on it here before we go to our break. Mark, is there anything to what Ricky's saying here that we should celebrate people who unite us, not divide us?
I have a problem with celebrating individuals in this context. If you want to have a discussion in a junior high or high school about America's history of political violence, and, for instance, was John Brown a hero or a terrorist, then that is a valuable discussion, because we do sort of want to teach it both ways. And I also think that it needs to be understood in the context of decades of conservatives seeing organizations like the national teachers groups push for a lot of things into curricula that they disagree with, and they were just shunted off to the side and basically abused for daring to suggest that the curriculum ought to be somewhat more mainstream. And so now it seems to me like I'm not happy with the politicization of any curriculum, but for people now to say, oh my God, we shouldn't do this, after there have been no small number of years where there was an effort to do exactly that, I'm skeptical.
Well, we need to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll also be talking about the federal government shutdown, a little news out of the Nashville airport, concerns about traffic on the ground and in the air. We'll also keep taking your calls at 615-760-2000. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. It's our weekly Roundabout episode where we take a moment to think a bit think through the headlines. Our panel's helping to take your calls. How's the shutdown of the federal government hitting you and your family? We've also been discussing the continued consternation over how schools are honoring conservative activist Charlie Kirk, who was assassinated last month. What's going on at your school? The number to join the conversation, 615-760-2000. Our panel today includes WPLN Special Projects producer Meribah Knight, senior reporter here, Republican strategist Mark Rogers, and chaplain Dahron Johnson of the Tennessee Equality Project. Thanks for being here today. Let's get slightly less political, talk about Nashville's growing pains. The international airport's been dealing with traffic all around. There was like an 8-hour traffic jam a few weeks ago that we learned this week was partly caused by some new policy of not letting ride shares drop off at the main drop-off area, which I didn't know was a thing now. And then this week got a new report. The Tennessean reported about air traffic control concerns. Staffing in the tower is actually lower than it was a decade ago. And air traffic is at a record high in Nashville. You had this retired air traffic controller from Nashville's tower saying that sooner or later something is going to happen because there have been quite a few near misses. Meribah, there's been such incredible growth at the airport over this period, like 10 years. The number of jobs associated with the airport has like doubled, I think, over a 5 or 6 year period leading up to the pandemic. Why not in the tower?
I mean, I think that's everybody's question. It's like, how did we get here? How did we get to this moment where we have a record number of people flying? And we've always known that the job of air traffic controllers is incredibly stressful. We've always known that it has like really high rates of depression and stress. And yet now we find ourselves with less of them, which makes me lead to believe they're probably more stressed. I think everybody it was pretty sobering after, the DC crash of the helicopter and all the reporting that came out of that. I mean, it is perplexing to me. I mean, obviously that is something that is not tied to state funding, so it's like, how did we get here? Can we even get that answer right now from the federal government? It's shut down, but it's concerning. It is very concerning.
The airport authority can manage to build a couple of $300 million hotel, but they can't increase wages enough to hire more air traffic controllers. And you cannot possibly tell me that if you went to other cities that are not anywhere as near as interesting as Nashville and said, we're going to give you 20% more than you're making now, maybe 30% more, we couldn't have all the air traffic controllers we need.
Yeah. Well, my understanding, the FAA really controls it themselves. And Nina Cardona, who hosts the Nash Villager podcast, had a great write-up about some of the history here and the complexities of the FAA and recruiting. But I know it's an issue around the nation, and we're just feeling it in a particular way here in Nashville. Let's move to the federal government, which, these are talking federal employees we're talking about, although air traffic controllers are considered essential personnel, thankfully. But you've also got the Postal Service still working. Even the national parks are going for now. But no one is getting paid, is my understanding, until a budget of some kind passes. For federal workers, if you're listening, we'd love to hear from you about how this affects your family. And if you'd rather not use your name on the air, we totally understand and can accommodate that. The number is 615-760-2000, or leave a note in the chat of the live video stream at youtube.com/@WPLN. Mark, have you seen anything in this debate in Washington over a shutdown that makes you think there could be a meeting of the minds?
I think eventually things will get so bad for one side or the other that they will. I think it was probably a mistake by the Democrats simply because I think they could have waited and seen the cut start taking effect and said, we told you so. As to a local aspect, there was mention in the article about Fort Campbell. Soldiers aren't getting paid, which doesn't just affect the soldiers.
Yeah.
It affects small businesses all over Montgomery County.
Yeah.
They suffered, and it won't be this long, but when the troops were deployed to Iraq for so many months and years, it had a devastating effect on a lot of small businesses. And even a short term could have that same effect with some businesses.
Yeah, Dahron.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that if I can, Mark, and affirm that local concern, right? I mean, it sounds so basic, but we're heading into leaf peeping season, right? And even ahead of the shutdown, there is a pretty large coalition. I saw an AP story about this, a coalition of national park directors who are saying, if there is a shutdown, we don't recommend keeping the parks open at minimal status because they were already working under sort of 24 to 30% workforce reductions, and we're pretty strained on resources to begin with. Yeah. So then trying to keep them up on an even thinner, flimsier shoestring, especially for parks like Great Smoky Mountains, for example, that is going to see, it's already the highest trafficked park, I think, national park in the nation at its busiest time of year. People want to go up in the mountains, see the leaves. And that's talk about downstream economic impacts for local businesses, the folks who have a Airbnb that they count on to, rent out to folks touristing the area and trying to see what there is to see in our great state in the Western Division, right? Yeah. That's going to have a big impact, and we need to be pretty concerned about that.
I just, when I heard Mark say about that the Democrats could have waited, I think it's interesting to think about the risk they're taking right now by doing this. And I think that when they think about healthcare, I think the Democrats are like, that's our issue. Like, so they don't have much power right now. And I think they most likely saw that this was the one opportunity they had to really take some power and stand on a ground that they're very comfortable with, which is healthcare. But it's been really interesting. I think NPR had a story about this, but talking kind of come back to rhetoric. I don't know if anybody's gone to like the HUD website, but when you go there, it's
Housing and Urban Development.
Yeah, it literally says the radical left in Congress shut down the government. HUD will use available resources to help Americans in need. And
on the government website?
On the government website, it says that. And then there was a story at NPR about kind of memos flying and directives on language, the radical left. So it's really interesting to see the rhetoric ramp up. But also on the Democratic side, I can see why they felt like this was going to be their moment to kind of like take this risk. But all told, it's just, it does feel like, I don't know how we come together. It just seems like the language is ratcheting up.
Yeah. How's the shutdown affecting you as a listener? 615-760-2000 to join us on air. I had to check. We've got reservations to stay in the LeConte Lodge in a couple of weeks, and I'm not sure if it'll be open or not. We're going to find out in the Smoky Mountains. All right, let's move to the National Guard in Memphis. Speaking of people who won't be getting paychecks, my understanding, also other federal agents already in Memphis to help reduce crime at the instruction and orders of the White House. And this week, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Secretary of War, and Attorney General Pam Bondi were in Memphis saying federal agents were there to make the job of local law enforcement easier. There have been many activists speaking out against this maneuver, but also I found this interesting. Outside the event with Secretary Hegseth, there was this concerned resident talking to all the TV cameras there, talking about his hopes for Memphis. Let's take a listen.
Here's what I hope, that this creates a vision on what life could actually be here. Just imagine, you don't have to worry about being shot on the way to work, or my truck got robbed. Someone stole my truck a couple months ago. Why does this stuff keep happening?
So, obviously there's some folks who are just pointing out the obvious truth that Memphis has had quite a bit of issue related to violence and crime, even though it has been reducing in recent years. Darren, you work for this statewide organization, probably focus on Memphis a little more than the rest of us. Could Memphis use the kind of help that they're getting?
Well, a couple of things come to mind here. First of all, is the reaction that we're seeing, the amount of force that's moving into the city, commensurate with quite a bit of an issue, right? I think that there's maybe a bigger gap between quite a bit of an issue and bringing our armed forces in to help somehow ameliorate or address that issue. I remember being in New York City a month after 9/11, and how much the memory of seeing armed members of the armed forces patrolling the streets during that time. And one almost understands it in a moment of chaos and uncertainty that was experiencing. But the fact that so many years on that memory still remains seared in my everyday life tells us just what an impact that can have. And I'm not sure that impact actually helps address whether your car gets stolen or not. And then the ways, I have to add this, the ways that is paired with a persistent, speaking about rhetoric, Meribah, a persistent language of othering. Persistent
what do you
language
mean by
that this other, that I will identify as whoever, some quite often non-majority person, right? In this case, non-majority person who does not have white skin more than often, is made out to be a villain, is made out to be monstrous. When we think about the rhetoric during the campaign, we heard all types of awful tales about what those people are doing in our various
President Trump.
From our various communities. And all that does is then create not a person, but an object, this disenfranchised monster that we then feel validated to take any type of action against that we want.
Yep.
I know this from my own lived experience and the ways that language is meant to other and push us out of the public sphere rather than trying to keep folks engaged in the process of how to make our communities better. We're trying to split off folks. We're not going to get anywhere with that.
Yeah. Mark Rogers, I wonder if you've seen, Governor Bill Lee seems like he's been active. I mean, he even appeared with Hegseth and others this week. But trying to maybe straddle the line, not upset leaders in Memphis, trying to make this something that can be palatable for them. Is he trying to make sure he's not upsetting local leaders, and can it work?
I think Lee is trying to walk a very thin line, and I think he's doing a pretty decent job of it. I think that the question that we all ought to be asking related to Darren's comments, though, is they're making progress arresting people, and that's a good thing. Getting violent criminals off the streets is a good thing.
If that's who they're arresting, I guess that's a question.
Well,
yeah.
I'm taking the administration there at what they're saying, but the question is, what happens after the circus leaves town? What are the long-term solutions? What are we looking at doing? And here again, the rhetoric comes in and the political division becomes in, because there are basically two camps that say different things are responsible, and there is doubtlessly some truth to both, but you can't solve it by only looking at one. You have to solve it on both sides.
Yeah, if you'd like to chime in on the conversation, 615-760-2000. Meribah, you've certainly covered law enforcement and the justice system a lot over your years. Mm-hmm. As part of this, there was an announcement of a pretty sizable investment that I think Memphis was wanting anyway in law enforcement, like at the state level. Were you surprised to see this, go beyond just the Guard being sent in to make a show of force?
No, I think that it's long been known that Memphis struggles with, safety, issues of safety. Now, the numbers of violent crime have gone down. I think it's really important to keep that in the conversation when we talk about federal troops or the National Guard coming into cities like Memphis. But no, this is, known as a very law and order administration. And so they're going to, do that in whatever way, whether it's local or national. But I do think, I keep going back to the rhetoric, just because this week has just been such an interesting progression of it. So you've got, the federal troops coming to Memphis with very vague details of what they're going to do, or, just saying that they're not going to make arrests and that they're going to support local law enforcement. But other than that, we really don't know much. Mm-hmm. And then you have Trump before his, high-ranking military officials saying we should use these dangerous cities as testing grounds for the Department of War, which is a truly kind of remarkable statement. Like, that needs to be kind of pinned on the bulletin board of the arc of rhetoric, because when you decide to move into cities with federal troops, and when you divide a country with the rhetoric the way he has, and then you say, maybe we'll try out using our military against our own citizens, it feels like a very slippery slope.
Darren?
I just want to affirm that, and the ways that highlights what I'm saying about this language of othering, right? That specific persons aren't enough. Then specific communities aren't enough. Then we move on to entire cities that say this area is so beset with issues that we have to take this drastic action. I feel like that othering language has become a larger and larger circle, not satisfied with just picking off a few individuals. But we're now talking about whole cities, right, that contain a wide diversity of folks with a wide diversity of
And
concerns.
he tried to do this in his first term, and Mattis resigned, and people got fired. I mean, but Hegseth is different. He's not General Mattis. And so the way that he interacts with the president is different. And so we are in Trump 2.0, but it is a very different one.
Yeah. Well, we need to take one more break. When we come back, we're going to get a little bit to school vouchers, private school vouchers, talk about rural hospitals for a moment, and we're even going to leave you with some smile stories. That's right. That's a reason to stay tuned. We'll be right back. This is Nashville. Stay with us.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Blake Farmer, and this is Nashville. Well, we're wrapping up our Roundabout panel with Meribah Knight, Mark Rogers, Dahron Johnson as our panel as we talk through the headlines of the week. And we'd love to hear from you. The number is 615-760-2000. We're going to talk a little bit about private school vouchers, some new data that's come out, a rural hospital reopening and what that may tell us. And we've got some smile stories. If you've got a smile story from your week, I think we need it. We need to hear from you. We've got a couple that we'll hit you with here in a moment. But let's hop straight to private school vouchers. So we learned more details this week about just how much demand there is for this new program in Tennessee. I think 42,000 people applied for 20,000 vouchers, and there's some complications there where half of them have income requirements, half of them don't. But Mark Rogers, does the legislature take this data point here that we had so much demand and use that as a reason to expand the program?
Oh, I think they will definitely expand the program. I think the question becomes where they will find the school capacity for some of the private schools and how much unhappiness there is as the students leaving the public schools result in a loss of students. And this would be more true at like junior high and high school level. The kids who were enrolled in the advanced placement or the higher levels classes, if they go to private school, there will be fewer kids and there will be no way to justify having those classes in public schools.
Yeah, I guess we saw some of the same thing going on when charter schools were really draining students from, the sort of like zoned school. I mean, especially like parts of Nashville, East Nashville, where there were a lot of charter schools that popped up. Although, Dahron, I believe a lot of the concern at the moment and question is like, well, are these really people who are newly moving to a private school, or are they actually just people who go to a private school and now they get an extra $7,300 from the state, right?
I mean, this has been a question and a concern since the very first glimmers of this conversation. I think it's certainly something that we need to continue to keep our eye on. And I will say, if I may pivot just slightly to pick up the point that Mark was making here, that we had this lovely moment of being able to see our 19-year-old lovely, lovable, and loving autistic son graduate from Metro Nashville Public Schools. But the reason that he was able to do that was because there was population enough of folks in the exceptional need system, part of Metro Nashville Public Schools, that created a critical mass that they were really able to put resources and persons in place. If students choose to leave, not just exceptional ed students, but any type of students, will there continue to be the type of funding and availability of that support in public schools, which are mandated to have that type of support through 504 plans and IEPs and so on, ADA requirements, where for those students, there's not a great choice going into private settings. And so they don't have the option there, yet the financial basis for the types of services they get in public schools starts leaving with these other students, which creates another type of nuance, not just the AP class, but the speech pathologist. How are they being funded as well?
Yeah, good point there. Were you, as a listener, one of the ones who was turned down for these private school vouchers that were available, or has the program changed your view on vouchers? We heard some of that on the show several weeks ago. The number to call is 615-760-2000, but do call quickly because our time will end up being short. Meribah, did I cut you off? Mm-mm. All right. Well, let's move on.
Can I add one
Mark,
thing to
go
that?
ahead.
One of the fascinating things about this is the most bitter opposition to the voucher bill didn't come from the center or the left. It came from the even further right.
That it's not a conservative move to funnel tax dollars to private schools, essentially.
Well, it was also they see it as a government nose under a camel's nose under the tent to homeschooling, because homeschoolers also qualify for the money. And if you really get down and dig at this, what is most fascinating is the rise of the argument about absolute parental rights, that the parents have the absolute right to not have their kids vaccinated, to send them to whatever school, even if the results are not good, that it is still first and foremost the parents' rights.
Darren?
Yeah, it really does move us into a through the looking glass type of moment, right, where things become curiouser and curiouser, because you've seen other odd little moves, odd big moves, honestly, but in little places from the state legislature, right, where in an attempt to broaden the state's binary definition of sex, they use TSSAA as a mechanism to move those gender restrictions into private schools, which they, in any other circumstance, would argue is kind of a sacrosanct space that are there specifically so that parents and teachers have settings that further a specific educational or pedagogical goal, and yet the state, again, this curious bedfellows and curious maneuvers moment, has found ways to maneuver state-controlled, state-say, even into private settings, which complexifies this issue even further, I think.
Well, if you'd like to chime in, do it quickly, 615-760-2000. We can come back to it, but we're going to move briefly on to rural hospitals. So the hospital in Little Perry County, I say little because it actually is among the smallest counties in Tennessee, but it closed years ago, and it was one of those many closures that put Tennessee as one of these leading states in rural hospital closures. But a company called Braden Health, which has been reopening closed hospitals around, kind of west of Nashville in Tennessee, are doing it again, open another hospital there in Linden, which is in Perry County. Meribah, do you see this kind of thing as a positive sign for rural Tennessee? What does it tell us?
I mean, I hope so. I think, we all talk about how kind of fundamentally broken our healthcare system is. And I think the closure of rural hospitals is really a byproduct of all of the dysfunction of all of the waste, or, so many different people getting a piece of the pie or taking their bite of the apple. But I would hope, I think we all want someone to figure out how to do it, and how to do it in a way that's going to be financially feasible, because the closure of rural hospitals is a devastating thing for these communities. I mean, we talk about it all the time, nationally too, but Tennessee, you said, that is a particularly, it's an acute problem here. But I think it's like, if we can have some of these folks that have figured out the numbers and that who can reopen these hospitals and make the numbers work, I mean, that is really a glimmer of hope. There's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Dahron, is a rural hospital reopening, and there have been several now, and most of the same company behind them. Is it a political win for one party or the other?
Well, one, first and foremost, I think needs to hope that it is a health win for the people in underserved areas, right? And I will say that this really brings out the nuance of how many interconnected parts there are with the way healthcare works. I've been in hospice spaces for years and years and years. There are a variety of nonprofit and private entities that offer hospice. I think we have like a baker's dozen of certificates of needs for hospice just in Davidson County alone. And the fact that you have sort of commercial companies offering this care that moves with efficiency rather than perhaps a nonprofit's desire for robustness of care, paired with the fact that the nonprofit then has different restrictions about how it can allocate its funds. So all the entities have the same Medicare rules, private, nonprofit, but then nonprofits have specific restrictions around how they use their funds. And that creates a lot of challenges, whether that's a hospice or a hospital, on how successful these things are going to be over the long run. Alive, for example, considered selling, right, to a private entity. And I think it's in large part because they were trying to figure out how to be a nonprofit in the space where the rest of the players were for-profit entities.
Dahron, making a case for the nimbleness of for-profit healthcare.
I don't know that I'm making I don't know that I'm making a case for-profit. As a matter of fact, I would say that healthcare I'd say I'm making the exact opposite argument in saying that I think first and foremost, our concern needs to be for patients and persons and how we make sure that our care is robust enough to care for the wide variety, the unpredictable variety of patients and persons that will arrive in our healthcare settings, that we then offer some efficiency strategies around rather than starting from how do we make our healthcare efficient, and then we'll work the robustness in afterwards.
Yep. Well, let's take one more call before we get out of here, and that's Gina from Murfreesboro taking us back to vouchers. Gina, you're on This Is Nashville.
Oh, yes. I appreciate your time and thank you. And I'm calling to express the concerns with all that, because I know, thinking for not only myself and my daughter and so many others, family and friends and all that. We attended public schools. I think we need to keep public schools strong. That they should continue to be funded, because it is a free and appropriate education, a well-rounded education. And as an education major, I strongly support public schools, because they're accessible to all, not just those who are wealthy.
Gina in Murfreesboro, we take your point, and thank you for delivering it so succinctly here on vouchers. All right, we have to work in a smile before we get out of here. So can we leave you with a smile? I offer this story from a great video journalist, Forrest Sanders at News Channel 5, who introduced me this week to Jim the Juniper. It is a large juniper bush in East Nashville. It is actually on Google Maps as a tourist attraction. They put googly eyes on it. They dress it up. It's a very big juniper bush. And now people honk. They take pictures with it. Looks like a cartoon character. You got to look it up. It has an Instagram page, Jim the Juniper. Meribah, what you got?
Oh, I read the New York Times article about the Goat Island in Chattanooga and was just tickled and put it in my Instagram feed and said, this is the content we need right now. We need to learn about goats on islands.
Darren.
I have to say, I'm big on how we connect as neighbors. I'm on the MHRC. I'm on the board for Neighbor to Neighbor, so I'm always glad to see neighbors doing neighborly things. And I had a neighbor just the other day set up the Booked on Burris little free library. I was really excited for that. Look him up on Instagram.
Oh, love those little libraries, Mark.
Tom Sillo is a 58-year-old college football player who just got an NIL deal.
Oh, my goodness. 58 with an NIL deal. Well, Mark Rogers, Meribah Knight, Chaplain Dahron, Annalise Johnson, thank you so much for joining our Roundabout panel. Come back soon. All right, thanks for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. If you miss an episode, just go back into the podcast feed or at thisisnashville.org. Yesterday had beautiful stories tied together all by Hispanic heritage. I learned about the largest cup of coffee in Nashville. Do not sleep on Joss 15. That and some other stuff is in our podcast feed. Today's episode produced by Mary Mancini. Tasha A.F. Limley is our managing editor. Josh Deepen managing the phones. Actually, it was Mary managing the phones today. Josh was on video for our YouTube stream, and our board operators, Liv Lombardi. Masterminds behind our theme music are LaRange and Namir Blade. You can always leave us a message between shows if you like at 615-751-2500 or comment on the socials. This is Nashville. I'm Blake Farmer. Go in peace.